and virtual teams. And she runs her own consultancy called Making Projects Work. I'm delighted to welcome Penny Pullan to the You and Your Business studio. Hiya, Penny.
Lovely to be here, Alec.
Well, that's a right mouthful of a book, but there's a lot of good stuff in it, so we'll talk about that a bit later. But as part of the process, as I tell everybody, is we're keen to know where you were in your last year in school and what was going through your mind.
Well, I was in an all-girls boarding school on the East Coast, right up by the sea in Suffolk, and working very hard at 4 A levels with lots of maths and physics and a bit of chemistry, and preparing to go off for a gap year.
All right. So you went for the gap year. Where did that lead you off to?
Well, I ended up on the factory floor in a factory just south of Leicester. Right. Now, interestingly enough, as a sponsored student, I was white collar, so I had white overalls that I had to wear around the factory. All the 300, I think, odd, all men in the factory, apart from the foreman, all wore navy blue overalls.
That must have been a challenge.
That was certainly quite different, but it was fascinating, and I was quite friendly, and people found I was quite useful for crossword puzzle questions. If they had difficult questions, they might be the sort of thing I'd know. I can remember somebody saying, "What's a river in Oxford? Blank S, blank S." And I just said ISIS. And then they were all really excited and all keen to get me to help them out with questions. And I was used by the foreman as, I think, as an anti-swear device. He invited me in to observe the union negotiations they had. But it was all fascinating, very different.
Well, it's certainly a testament to your skills to be, as a people person, to be able to endure that sort of environment.
It was certainly different. It was very, very interesting.
Fantastic. All right, so a year there, then off to Cambridge, I understand.
That's right. Yes, I did engineering there. Yeah, hard work. I think initially at school and university, I probably was attracted to the things that were particularly difficult. I think some people think, oh, if something's really hard work, then it's worthwhile. I think probably now, many years on, I tend to think the things that I'm really good at and that come easily and that I enjoy are probably the best things to focus on.
Yes, I think there is some sort of religious connotation behind it. The world must be a difficult place to navigate and we should suffer. So you've obviously overcome that part of it.
I did enjoy the maths, though, and the engineering so much that I stayed on for a whole, I think it took me 4 years extra in the end, and did a PhD in nanotechnology, of all things.
Nanotechnology, wow. And I mean, I doubt if many people were even thinking of nanotechnology back then, were they?
It was actually in superconductors, which is even more strange, but it's quite trendy at the time. It was fun, but I escaped from academia quite quickly at the end of that.
All right. Well, you'd served your time to academia already. Were you in for 7 or 8 or 9 years already?
Yeah, quite a long time.
All right. So what sort of tickled you pink about old nanotechnology and engineering, and what were you wanting to do next?
Well, at that stage, I was desperate to do something not in academia. And I was living in Cambridge, so I went to work with a consultancy company, but they had a little branch of brainy people in Cambridge doing all sorts of fun things. So we were doing machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is quite trendy now. And that was in the mid-90s, so 25 years ago. We were predicting the power load on electricity power stations in Scotland, and we were trying to predict the stock market, which didn't work, and we were trying to read handwriting, all sorts of things. I'm sure it's much easier now with powerful computers. Had lots of fun, and we designed some of these very, very new things that had never been done before. Websites.
Right. Wow. And just pulling you back a second there to artificial intelligence. Maybe you might just tell our listeners what you describe as artificial intelligence, because people have so many sort of definitions or possibly don't even know.
Well, for me, I was working with neural networks, which are just computational devices trying to model a little bit what the little elements that make up the brain are like. So yeah, you're essentially giving them lots of data, and telling them what the right answer is. And if you give them enough data, then they may well pick up patterns and so on. And that's what's being used a lot now, using artificial intelligence to pick up strange patterns or notice things that are different.
Yes, so it still goes back to the old adage of computers, you know, what you put in and sort of you'll get out then at the end if you give it
Yeah, the training. What's really interesting is that they're finding now if they train people with real world data, then all the real world biases and things like that are coming out as well. Right. In the machines, which is, yep, what you put in is very important.
Getting back to the websites you were talking about, again, this was in more the early days. What were the sort of challenges around that?
What the challenges were that people they weren't really used to websites. They hadn't really had them before. So I wasn't so involved in the technology as trying to understand the way people would approach them and making the choices as intuitive as possible so that it would make sense and they could use it, even though they'd never been trained step by step how to use it. And it was fascinating.
Yes, because my experience, and I think a lot of people who are in business would experience that what we'd call the technology type people often don't understand the sort of user interface and the importance of that, are sort of concentrated more on the technology side.
Absolutely. We had some fun doing usability testing where the technical people would have come up with something and we would get some real people, not that the technology geeks aren't real people, but we bring in some people from outside who'd never seen a website before, which is a funny thought now, isn't it? And we'd put them in front of the screen and we just filmed them and also what they could see, and then play it back to the technology people. And there were lots of places where people got baffled and didn't know what to do. And the technology people thought it was obvious, but it wasn't at all. And that was really helpful for getting across to people that actually you need to make things really intuitive and that other people might not think the same way that you do.
Yes, and there is a presumption that people will make that leap, but in fact they don't. You have to handhold them.
Yep. Or make it so easy that actually they can make the choices and use the site really easily without having these blockers.
Right. Okay, so websites and that sort of world. So what next for Penny?
Well, then my husband got a lectureship at Loughborough University and I couldn't commute from Loughborough to Cambridge, so I moved on and worked for a pharmaceutical company.
Fantastic. Pharmaceutical, as you do. So you've moved from artificial intelligence websites now to pharma.
Yep.
So they obviously hadn't got you there as a chemist. So what was your sort of involvement?
There actually is a bit more of a link. It's not quite as tenuous as you might think. They brought me in to help them with the technology supporting the science. So, for example, they had huge numbers of chemicals that they'd used in drug trials across the years. And what they started doing is something called high throughput screening, where they try out all these potential drugs that they'd used in the past for new things, and they'd see whether there was a reaction. But they get masses and masses of data, and I wrote a little routine that I think it took something that used to take a clinical scientist 13 hours. It went down to 13 minutes. I was quite proud of that.
Yes, and why wouldn't you be? And is this sort of, again, sort of harping back to the theme of artificial intelligence and about how you use information to be able to do a lot more?
Yeah, it's not about replacing the human. So whenever you think about artificial intelligence, it's not about getting rid of the human. It's about augmenting the human. So, you know, the easy things that are obvious, you don't need a human being to look at the results and to say, oh, that didn't work or that did work. Computers can sort that out. All I did was I took out everything that was obvious and then just presented the results that were not that clear and that needed that human judgment and expertise.
Yes, and I think you've harped on something there that are picked out on something there that people tend to think artificial intelligence is out there to replace humans, but that's not the fact. It's to make their life a lot easier in the more
and if you can combine the wonderful things that we have, the real human intelligence, and augment it and supplement it and support it by artificial intelligence, then actually, you know, you get rid of the mundane and repetitive elements that computers can do brilliantly, and free us up to do the creative, innovative stuff that we're so good at.
So in terms of the pharma and that, let me call it a program you wrote, for the want of a better expression, is that something that they're still able to use today and it's just updated? So
it was an awfully long time ago. I heard that it was still being used for many years afterwards, but I'm sure they will have moved on to new systems and computers by now.
I would think it might be fair then to suggest that there are many companies out there who could use this sort of knowledge but don't even know it exists.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yep.
Right, that's straightforward enough. Anyway, so on to from pharma to where next?
Yes, well, after a while, I saw a wonderful job advertised. It was actually for Mars Incorporated.
All right, and of course we all think of Mars bars, but they're a much broader organization than that.
Absolutely, because the part of the company where I went to work was actually I was working with the pet food and the human food side of Mars.
Oh, fantastic! So, what were you involved in there that you can talk about?
All sorts of things, supply chain planning, a lot of technology to support that as well, and then also moving on to being part of the internal consultancy. There's a team within that called Effective Business Change. And I think by then, my interest had moved on from the technology and applying that to actually what makes people tick and what makes some projects work so incredibly well. And other similar projects can just be stressful from beginning to end and just miserable for everybody on them. And I got fascinated. What was it that made the difference? And that's what I've been thinking about and working on and writing about as well for years, ever since.
We're going to talk about your book in a minute, because not alone is it fascinating, but it's also a long title. So we'll get around to that. And it has relevance today as well, which I think is very, very important. In terms of sort of the Mars experience, how long were you with Mars?
A decade.
Really? All right. So you must have had some interesting challenge. You were talking about supply chain and working for a large organization, and now that you run your own consultancy, is there anything that you were able to take away from what large organizations do that was a benefit to you in your own personal business?
Lots of things. I think one of them is to systematize. You know, don't do the same thing don't do it from scratch over and over again. So if you're going to do something and you know you'll do it again, actually understand what you're doing, take a note, think about how it can be improved in the future, and if you can automate, brilliant. Because with a one-person business, you know, the more you can automate, the more you can get done automatically, have systems for, then the easier it is.
Wow, you're talking my language now. I love all of that. You're right though, so many people reinvent the wheel. I have a thing like even called a project journey. So every project starts the same way and finishes the same way, and all the steps in between are the same. So it's about consistency. That sort of thing you're talking about.
Absolutely. And for a framework is great for projects, but of course every project is unique in some ways. So always might need adapting a little bit.
Yeah, but that's grand. But if you have the basic framework, then you can just bolt on the bits and pieces. That's fascinating. So anyway, a decade with Mars, and what was next for Penny?
Well, at that point, they then decided that everybody who worked in that part should move to Slough.
All right, good old Slough.
Yeah. Now, I thought actually, perhaps I could start my own business one day fund, which over 10 years had managed to get to £4,000, which wasn't going to go very far. Right. So instead I took redundancy and actually thought, well, let's give it a go. I'll start my own business, and if it doesn't work, I'll be fine for a year and I can just go back and get another job. And here I am 13 and a half years later.
Obviously you found success, I would say relatively easy, but where did you start? I mean, here you are coming from the large corporate world into running your own business. What were the challenges for you with the knowledge you had in the sector that you're in, now moving into that world of the SME?
Well, while my company is an SME, I found that most of my clients have been large multinationals, or alternatively people who are working within large multinationals. So some external contractors who go in and work for those large multinationals. So in a way, the knowledge that I've brought from being within a big company has been really helpful as I go in and work with other big companies and governments and charities and so on.
And of course, you know the language as well that they speak, so therefore you can communicate very well. Let's talk about the book. As I said, it had a very long title. Maybe you might tell our listeners what the title of the book is and its relevance.
The short title, which is much easier, is Virtual Leadership.
Right, virtual leadership.
Is that better, Alec?
Yeah, sure. And your website, while I think of it, what's your website, Penny? Yeah,
well, it's my company's Making Projects Work Limited. So the website is makingprojectswork.co.uk. So, but the book, I know it's long, but it's interesting because this used to be a niche book. Right. Which was really there are just a few people who were interested in practical strategies for getting the best out of virtual work and virtual teams.
Right.
Until March this year. And then everything changed because suddenly everybody was virtual. They had to go virtual. If people could work from home, they had to. And all of a sudden, people are going, oh, how on earth do I motivate teams? How do I manage work when I can't see the people?
Wow, yes, that's a challenge, all right.
And guess what? It's all in here, along with lots of other stuff.
Well, tell us some of the takeaways without us skipping off having to buy the book. I mean, give us a couple of tasters out of the book that you think might be of value to.
Okay, so just a few little things. When we initially went to lockdown, I noticed that people spend an awful long time sitting on video conferences. Did you notice that, Alec?
Yes, yeah? Of course, yeah.
So some of the people I was working with were on calls, Zoom, WebEx, Skype, whatever, from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. The working days seemed to expand and they spent all their time sitting in front of a screen. Now that really is not helpful because our bodies aren't designed to sit for 12 hours, let alone in front of a screen. So one thing that's really helpful is if you're going to have video calls, instead of making them on the hour until the next hour and then having the next call immediately afterwards, if you start at 5 past and you finish at 5 to the hour, then you automatically get a break. And if you stand up and walk around, I mean, it's a tiny little tip, but it makes a huge difference to people.
And really, this is about how the human mind is programmed. We like all things balanced and even, and so we're breaking that mold slightly so that it makes us slightly uncomfortable, but there's a benefit behind it.
It's also tricky because the calendar programs tend to put things on the hour.
Yes.
You actually have to do something different to say start at 5 to. So that can be useful, but also think about what work should be done in a video meeting.
Right.
And what work is best done asynchronously, which means what work can people do on their own at a time to suit them? And then what work actually is best done with everybody there? And with all the tools that we've got nowadays, you can do a lot of work, and discuss and things with other people, but without actually having to all be there at the same time.
Yes, I think the world is struggling with the technology. I don't think we've quite caught up with the challenges that technology and communications have and science have all sort of dovetailed into delivering to us.
It's interesting though, a lot of people are really focused on technology, and with virtual working, I think only about 10% of making it work really well is about the technology.
Right. Tell me more.
It's like an enabler. It's like electricity in a house.
Right.
I'm sure the first people to have electricity in the house were amazed by it, and they spent all the time going, oh, look, I've got a light bulb and I can turn the light on. But actually nowadays, if electricity is in a house, we can use it, we can make it a home.
Yes.
But we don't think about it all the time, we just use it. And I hope that that's where we're going with virtual technology, if we can really focus on the leadership aspects and how do we work together effectively, as long as you've got technology that works, you shouldn't have to spend your whole time thinking about the technology.
It poses other challenges, which I'd be interested in your comments on, that the working day has stretched, but often those in management expect their teams to be working late at night for no extra reward, when in fact we're trying to push back to a 4-day week. There seems to be a sort of contradiction here.
Surely, though, if you are a leader, surely what you want is the most effective work.
Yes.
And you want the best work. So actually, if you have people working ridiculously long hours in what, by its very nature, a global pandemic is a very stressful situation. We're all going to be at a heightened state of awareness, probably for months on end. So you probably want to measure things by what's produced. Don't focus on the time put in. Focus on what's produced and the quality aspects of those instead. And let people know that you don't care when they work, as long as that work is done to that standard. Then you'll find you get much better work. That whole feeling of autonomy, when people, knowledge workers who already have that level of skill, when they have more autonomy, they will work much better. They'll be motivated.
This is the whole thought process around self-leadership. I think it's fascinating because I think the sort of pandemic, what it has done is forced many sort of business owners and management into having to trust their employees working from home and putting in a day's work, and have discovered to their nearly shock and horror that people naturally do it anyway.
Absolutely. It's really interesting, actually. One of the big things I found that really helped people to be effective virtual leaders was the mindset. So the mindset that really doesn't work very well at all virtually is when you are directive, when you're into command and control, when you're really micromanaging everything that people are doing. It's very difficult to do virtually, and it tends to backfire because people tend to just put down the phone, or you can't glance around the office and see what people are doing anymore. What does work in its place is to be a much more facilitative leader, making it easy for people to do their best work, agreeing what they're going to do, agree the quality parameters for that work, agreeing how you're going to check how they're getting on and when they're going to check in with you, and then getting out of the way.
I think one of the big challenge posed these days is the number of companies that expect their employees to use their own personal devices, which they then spend an inordinate amount of time on social media with, which then puts them under pressure then to fulfill their obligations from the work perspective.
Yeah, I think professionals need to if they are given that autonomy, it needs to be on the basis that actually you're a professional. Guess what? This virtual leadership isn't just for the managers and the people at the top. Virtual leadership means everybody stepping up to be the best they can be, and that means things like balancing social media and work and all the other things that need to be done.
Taking your experience across so many industries, what have we got coming down the track, do you think, that will make a significant difference to us? I know, I suppose, let me kick back a bit. You mentioned the word pandemic in your book, which was written many years before it even happened. So actually tell our audience a bit about that, which I think is quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's quite funny. Just looking through the book, because this is written for people in global multinational companies, who were the ones really before March who had virtual teams. We had a few people in maybe India, some people in the UK, maybe some in the States, something like that. But actually going through it, I realized actually if I'd written a book for lockdown, it probably wouldn't have been that different at all. And I had a long list of what the reasons were why people worked virtually, and one of them, which is I'm quite pleased it was in there, is that people had a fear of epidemics.
Right.
Yep.
So you saw into the future and predicted it. Excellent.
Well, it's funny. The pandemic's been the number one risk certainly on the UK government risk register for years.
But that's exactly where it stayed, on the risk register, and very little action taken around it. In terms of your book, I believe your book is sort of soared into the stratosphere as a result of this and its relevance to people in lockdown.
It's quite funny because it's been quite a niche book for international project managers initially. And then in March, I think everybody's scrambling around going, how on earth do I cope with this? Is there anything out there? And then when they typed virtual into Amazon or whichever good book site they wanted to use, this popped up. Virtual leadership, practical strategies for getting the best out of virtual work and virtual teams. You see, it's not so much of a mouthful. And they thought, oh, that's just what I need. And so the sales shot up, but also it's been noticed. I've been quoted all over the place. And CEO Today rated it as a top 5 book for lockdown, which I thought was quite nice.
Well, that's fantastic accolade to get. Brilliant. And if people want to find out more and possibly to buy the book, your website, maybe you might remind our listeners of that.
Yes, makingprojectswork.co.uk, or they can contact me on LinkedIn or on Twitter if they want to. Just remember that my surname is Pullan, Pullan, and if you type Penny Pullan, I'll pop up. Very happy to hear from anybody.
All right. Now that we're 6 months or so into lockdown, have you any sort of predictions of where we're heading next, or based on your sort of knowledge?
I think the stage that we're going to next has begun already, and that's the hybrid team, where you have some people working from home and some people in an office. And I would say to all the people listening that actually the key challenge there is you need to create a level playing field. If you have if you just do things, think, oh, good, we're in the office, we can all be in a meeting room and we can have all the remote people dialing in, you won't have a level playing field, because all the people in the meeting room together, well, they'll be able to glance around, see each other, get the dynamics and nuances of conversation, all that stuff, have coffees together, have a chat. And the people who are dialing in from home will be left out of all of that. So you need to think, how can you make it a level playing field? And it might be that it makes sense, say, in virtual meetings to all dial in, even if some of you are in the office. So think very carefully when you begin to bring some people back into the office and have others remote. Think carefully, how can we keep it level?
It's interesting, I saw a couple of surveys recently which sort of suggested that most people would like to spend between 2 and 3 days a week in the office and the rest working remotely. So are we looking at a future where that working landscape is going to change forever?
I suspect we are. I'm also getting the feel that a lot of people have got the taste that actually commuting for long hours every day is not something they really want to spend so much of their life doing. So I wonder if we'll have people working in co-working spaces closer to their homes. I also heard a couple of days ago on the radio about an organisation that instead of having one big central London office was going to have several small offices all throughout the capital in the UK, so that people could just go to a suburban office closer to them rather than having to go in on packed trains or the underground and so on.
I suppose with about a minute and a half left, I'd really be interested in your thoughts on sort of artificial intelligence and where it's heading for next. Or is there something else you might like to talk about in the last minute and a half?
That's fine. I think it's quite funny that artificial intelligence, all the basics are the same as they were 25 years ago, but we've got the most amazing fast computers now. So you can do things now that we'd never dreamt of back in those days. I think just remember that AI is there to augment. It's the best use of it at the moment, to augment humans. Let the humans retain the creativity and the innovation parts of it, and let the AI do the hard work, the things that we find hard.
And I suppose in the last 20 seconds, is there anything that you use AI for in your business as an SME that might be useful?
Actually, I'm writing my next book, and I've been using AI to get it transcribed. So I speak my book rather than write it, and it's brilliant.
And what are you using? Do you mind me asking for doing
I'm
that?
using something, well, two things. There's otter.ai,
Right.
and another one called happyscribe.co.
Wow, there's a great tip on which to finish the show. And my thanks again to Penny Pullan for what a fascinating interview that was. I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours.